Welcome to the video on the moment in Book 4 where Aeneas gets some sense knocked into him. I guess that's relative to who you think is sensible, but here we are. And Mercury is going to visit Aeneas in Carthage. So if you remember from the previous passages we read, Aeneas, there was a storm, and Aeneas and Dido ducked into the same cave. They were married, and then rumor flew around everywhere saying these guys are together. So this is now a thing. So kind of the context for these passages that are going to come up here is that Aeneas is kind of dwelling in Carthage now. He's been there. I guess we don't really know how long. It doesn't say, but scholars have estimated 60 days, kind of like the beginning of the summer to the end of the summer, or maybe even just like half a season, all the way to people saying, "Oh, he was there for a whole year, and here he is the next summer, still there." But he's there long enough to, I guess, where he and Dido are just kind of like they're together, and he is essentially just doing whatever the Carthaginians want him to. You remember, like, he's driven by fate. Like, the fate is he's supposed to go to Italy, and he's supposed to create an establishment for what is going to become Rome. His son is supposed to found Alba Longa, which is supposed to give us Romulus and Remus later on, and then Rome from there. So he's kind of delaying himself, not really trying to leave, probably by pressure of Dido. Like, Dido does not want him to leave because she's madly in love with him due to the fact that she got shot by Cupid's arrow, and she is happy with him there, despite everybody else kind of thinking that this foreign guy just kind of swooped in and corrupted their queen. We still get the sense that Dido is madly in love with him, and everything is happy for her. However, the gods, of course, they need to enforce fate. You see here Jupiter sending Mercury down as an enforcing of fate, because he realizes that unless he does something, Aeneas is just going to stay there and fate will never take place, and that's not how fate works. And so you see the role of the gods here as not the determiners of fate. They don't sit there and say, like, well, we have to decide what his fate's going to be. It's much more along the lines of, we know his fate and he needs to get going, so let's nudge him in the right direction. And so before we read this part, just note that Jupiter hears Iarbas. Now, Iarbas is a former suitor of Dido. He wanted to marry her. He's a kind of a nearby king in one of the nearby North African civilizations. Wanted to marry Dido. He was a good guy. There's nothing completely bad about him. It's just that Dido doesn't like him that way. And he got mad when he heard the rumor that Aeneas was with Dido, because Dido had rejected somebody who, in Iarbas, who was probably of the same race and would have benefited both kingdoms, and it made sense for Iarbas and Dido to join together. However, in swoops this guy in a shipwreck, and all of a sudden Dido is head over heels for him. Iarbas feels a little gypped. So Iarbas prayed to Jupiter, and Jupiter is like, oh yeah, Aeneas shouldn't even be there, you should be moving on. So he sends Mercury down to kind of give him a good kick in the rear. And so that's kind of the context for these passages. There's a bit of Mercury flying down from Mount Olympus right before these passages. That's kind of cool. It's kind of some scenery-ish is shown. So if you have time and you care to, do read those as well. But Mercury swooping down and talking to Aeneas is shown in this image here. Probably one of the more famous images of this happening, where Aeneas is clearly looking down. He's kind of ashamed of himself. He's kind of like, oh, you're right. Gosh darn it. I really messed up sitting here with Dido, huh? And you can see Mercury kind of just pointing. He's like, you gotta go, dude. So it's kind of a I think it's actually a little bit of a humorous painting. The attire that Aeneas is wearing makes up a good chunk of the first passage, so you can kind of keep this mental image in your head of Aeneas with kind of this very royal, aristocratic look. He looks like he just got done with a parade where he has to be very kind of on display, and he's just kind of out in a rock somewhere. So I think it's a very good image of the description of what Aeneas is wearing. And when we read that part, I want you to keep in mind what is being said about Aeneas at that time, as he's saying in Carthage. What do the clothes mean about his character in this moment? Because it defines him a bit. The Romans were very interested in outward appearances of class and wealth and all that stuff, and so to depict Aeneas a very certain way with very certain descriptions is a way to like kind of tell you about his character in this moment. Now the character of Aeneas is always changing through the Aeneid as he tries to find himself and tries to define what Romanness is, but it's very clear that what Aeneas is doing in Carthage is not Romanness, which is why you're going to see a very specific description. And I also want you to keep in mind, as we read the first part, the stories of Mark Antony and Caesar and Cleopatra. Because Caesar was able to maintain his Romanness, but the story goes with Mark Antony is that she corrupted him and made him into some kind of Egyptian guy and changed the way he even looked. And that's very important here because you see Aeneas kind of embodying that same problem as a bit of propaganda. I always read these passages as when that first description happens as kind of a little bit of hinting that we're supposed to be thinking about Mark Antony. Because of course Octavian / Augustus he does not particularly like Mark Antony as one of his enemies. So anyway, let's get to some passages and see what we can read. So just as we look at the worksheet itself, the vocab to know, these are things that you're going to see a lot in like the AP curriculum. Maybe not a lot, but you're going to see them in the AP curriculum. They're common words or commoner words. And so I just thought, why not put some ones that you should like really kind of take away from these passages, and maybe make a couple flashcards or something. But I'm not going to make a big deal out of the vocabulary to know section. So what we're going to do is kind of zoom down here to the passage itself, and I'm assuming that you have something like Whitaker's Words or a dictionary or something like that nearby as you read these things. And do make sure that you look things up and read this on your own first. And this is more to check your work. So we have ut primalatis tectigit melagia plantis Aenean fundantem arces artectanovantem conspicit. So some really nice stuff here with an ut clause. Let's see if we can bracket that. There we go. And so here we have an ut, but we're not thinking about our ut clauses, our difficult ones with the subjunctive, because we have an indicative verb, so we just have an as. Okay, so don't worry too much about that ut, other than just say as. As at first, he is Mercury here, because we're talking about Mercury. He touched the Magalia, the direct object Magalia, the roofs, the houses, and then Alatis and Plantis agree with his winged sandals, with his winged feet. And so if you remember the image of Mercury always having wings on his sandals flying through the air. So as at first he touched the houses, the roofs with winged feet. Aeneon is a Greek accusative. I apologize for that form, but there it is. And then fundantem then agrees with it. Arces is the direct object going with that participle, so you have a doppel, D-O-P-P-L, which means the direct object of just the participle. So is tecta, because novantem is also a participle, so you have two participles in line 260. And then conspicit, verb. So he sees Aeneas. What is Aeneas doing? Well, fundantem arces, he's building up the citadels. Fundantem is where we get our word foundation from. Fundantem is he's building up the citadels. And novantem means to make new or renovating. He's renovating houses. This is because Carthage is very much a newer city, or at least it's trying to renew itself. There's a lot of construction going on. Even in Book 1, when you read that in the AP curriculum, you'll see there's a lot of construction of Carthage going on. So he's kind of taking on this role of somebody who's helping out with the construction of Carthage. Notice he's city building, and this is kind of his fate. His fate is to go start a city. And so he's doing that, but he's doing it to the wrong city. That's kind of the idea here. Aeneas is one who's supposed to be going and making Alba Longa, or his son is, and which is going to become Rome. So the idea of making a city is his fated destiny, and he's like supposed to be doing it, but he's doing it. He's just doing it in the wrong place. Okay. So let us move on here. Atquili stellatus jaspide fulva ensis erat Tyrio quardebat murrice laina demis sex umeris dives quae munera dido fecerat et tenuitelas descreverat auro. A little bit of a long one there. Oh, you know what I forgot to point out is that this is ingement. So notice how this sentence kind of ends right at the beginning of the line there. A little bit of an ingement where you kind of keep those last sentences going into the next line and then stop it immediately. Anyway, Ilias dative, stellatus is of course nominative, jaspide and fulva are both ablative, and they agree. And then ensis is a nominative, erat is a verb, and we can kind of stop there for a second. So what we have here is a dative and a verb to be. See this combination of things right there? A dative and a verb to be. And so I really want to encourage you to think about what kind of dative use that would be, and I'll tell you the answer right now. It's a dative of possession. So you remember the dative possession is how you translate there is a nominative to a dative, or the dative has a nominative. And so you have here a sword, an ensis. There was a sword, stellatus, starred, speckled. It means it's shimmering. Speckled with yellow jasper. A very beautiful sword. Swords are not supposed to be shimmering with precious jewels unless they are very aristocratic swords. You'll note that even his sword is not a real battle sword. This is not like the sword of somebody who is doing well in battle. This is the sword of somebody who just wants it to look good. And that is, again, I want you to keep in mind how the Roman mindset would view these things. A sword for a Roman represents a lot of things that jive with Roman culture in their idea of conquest, and their idea of what constitutes virtue, like the soldiers and the respect for them that they have. Those are supposed to be kind of like hard-working swords, dirtied swords. This is a sword that is like shimmering with yellow jasper. It's not the same. But anyway, and to him there was a sword shimmering with yellow jasper, starred with yellow jasper. And we get Tyrio agreeing with Murrice. And then we get a verb here, ardebat. Lainas your new subject, so nominative. Demisa ex umbris is a nice little participle phrase. Demisa, of course, goes with laina. Let's see if I'll draw this arrow really big and then delete it, but you can see it goes all the way around there. So we have a cloak, and a cloak having been sent down from his shoulder. It burns with Tyrian purple. There's a couple things there. Tyrian is an adjective that describes something from North Africa, where Tyre is. And then purple is, of course, the color of royalty. And so you get almost a cloak that Dido should be wearing or something like that. But it's supposed to be another sign that this guy is he's not a hard-working, hard-nosed Roman. This dude is being corrupted by luxury, a criticism that the Romans used for Eastern peoples. You'll note that Dido and Carthage are not to the east of Rome, so this is not a literal west versus east, it's a cultural west versus east, where you see the corruption of a hero, right? Aeneas, of a good man we're supposed to respect, by luxury goods, something that's very Eastern, and then Dido being the one who does that. And the reason I bring up the fact that it's not literally East and West is that if Dido is supposed to be Cleopatra, then it does become literally East and West, because Egypt is very much east to the Romans. Anyway, this cloak, dives quae munera Dido, which as a gift rich Dido had made. So we can bracket our relative clause there. The quai is actually referring to the laina, but it's also in apposition to the munera. The laina and the munera are the same thing, the gift and the cloak. And so you can say which gift, that's fine, which gifts Dido had made. Rich Dido, dives Dido. Or you can say which rich Dido had made as a gift. That's fine too. You can put the as a in there. I think both are just fine. And she had, discraverat, to sew, I think. She had sewn it. She had sewn the seams with thin gold. So just to like really make this thing, just an absolute, gaudy treasure. Instead of using thread, she uses thin gold. And Dido herself had made it, so this is like the queen made it for him as a gift. And the reason that agency is important is, again, to kind of bring up that Cleopatra thing. She's the one doing the corrupting of his image and his identity. And so Dido here, not intentionally ruining Aeneas, but to the audience, of course, that would be their perception of it. Anyway, Mercury becomes your subject again. He interrupts immediately. I like that phrase. Continue invadit. He interrupts immediately. Tu nunc Carthagines altae fundamenta locas pulchram cuxorius urbem extruis. More enjambment with extruis there. So we get our subject to. There's another other thing that it can be, so it's the subject. Nunc is an adverb. Carthagines altae, I agree. Fundamenta, if we already have a subject, must be a dio, a neuter plural. Locos looks like a noun. It is actually a verb. Loco, locare, to place, to put in a place. And so you get your to, and that becomes your verb, your second person verb. Pulchram goes with urbem. Uxorius is one of my favorite words in Book 4. I'll get to that in a second, but it is nominative, and it goes with the gapped to with extruis, which is also a verb, still second person. And so he interrupts immediately. Now you position, you place, you build, if you want, the foundations of High Carthage. Again, pointing out the, like, what are you doing? Because you're supposed to be building a different city in a different place. And you, Uxorius, which means, this is like, it's there's two ways to translate it. Are you ready? Henpecked. Now, henpecked is kind of like I guess an old school term. But like, it means like a guy who is under the complete authority of his wife. Like the hen rules the roost instead of the rooster. But I like, there's a different, more modern term for this, and whipped. This is, of course, referring to a guy who is under the complete control of the woman to him. And I guess nowadays that's not really like an insult like it was in the ancient world, and probably even in like the 1950s or something, as early as, or as soon as that. We've had this idea that the guy should be in charge, but it was an insult to be saying like, oh, your wife is ruling you. So if you imagine yourself in Rome in the ancient world, that was like kind of a huge like slap. Again, I don't think nowadays that's as relevant, because we have more of a gender equality idea. Nobody's ruling the other person. That's not really, there's no like hierarchical structure as an ideal anymore. So this is kind of an old school insult. You whipped, build up a beautiful city. Extruis to build up. I just find it funny that Mercury is calling Aeneas that. Mercury the god is kind of like emotionally like attached to the situation apparently, and calling Aeneas whipped to try to get him whipped up, to get him all fired up. I think that's funny. Eu is a great word. It means alas. It's just like, oh, regni rerum rerum quoblite tuarum. Yeah, this is good stuff. So oblite, if you go up here, I think it's a deponent. It takes a genitive object. Let me just make sure that I gave you the right note on that. Yep, there it is. Oblito, to forget, and then of course with a genitive object. So those genitive objects are explained. You get regni, rerum, as genitive objects. Oblite, though, is an interesting form. It's from the last principal part, which means it's a participle. And it's got an E ending, and that's odd because those 2-1-2 endings usually don't have E's, but if you think of the vocative form, the vocative, this is not going to be a complete sentence. This is just saying, like, oh, you, and then, like, naming something about him. So eu means like, alas, you, comma, having forgotten, because it's a deponent, having forgotten your kingdom and your affairs, like, you forgot what you're supposed to be doing. But there's no you in there. It's just like, oh, you, having forgotten your kingdom and your affairs. Like, what are you doing? All right. So that's that. The last 3 lines. Ipse deum tibi me claro de mittel limbo regnator, cae let terris qui numine torquet, ipsae fer ubet celeris mandata per auras. This next part is a little bit easier than that last line, I think. So ipse is your subject. Deum is actually deorum, so it's a genitive. Tibi is a dative. Me is an accusative. If ipse is the subject, that's going to be the direct object. Claro goes with Olimpo. That ablative explained by the de and demittit, down from. And then your subject is regnator, so ipse goes with regnator. Regnator literally means like the king, the ruler, that guy, but it refers to Jupiter. So the king of the gods himself, the king himself of the gods, sends me to you from, this is the de and demittit, from bright Olympus. Good stuff. And then we continue on. Let's do some yellow. So kai let teris teros. So we have 2 accusatives. The qui. We're like, wait a minute. The qui. That's odd. That's a weird qui. Because Kylum is neuter and Teros is feminine. Qui is actually starting there and referring to the regnator. And then we get an ablative and a verb, so it's the regnator, Jupiter, who turns the sky and the earths with his divine will. So that's kind of cool. He himself, haec fere ubet. So if we have a subject, this has to be a do because ipse is already the subject. Fere is an infinitive. Ubet's a verb. Ubet, of course, takes an ACI usually, so he orders. Yeah, so you have to gap a me here. Anyway, Caleris, that's a Caleris with a long is that agrees with auros. So that's one of those, like, should be an es, but it's actually an is. And that's a preposition. And then mandata, haec actually agrees with mandata. That's a neuter plural. So that becomes the direct object of fere. He himself orders, gapped, that I bring these orders through the swift breezes. So there you go. All right, we continue the story here. Jupiter just sent him down, gave him these orders. And then Mercury just kind of turns to Aeneas and he starts, quid struis, aut quas spe libicis terris otia terris. It's very nice with terris and terris. Anyway, quid struis. What are you planning? What are you building? What are you doing? So this means to build. It also means to plan. Like, what are you building? What are you doing? I think what are you doing actually works better here for our modern context. Like, what are you building is because he's supposed to be saying like, what are you doing? Like you need to get your tail in gear. and you're doing something that's not productive. So, like, what are you building? Or qua spe. So here's your question, qua spe, and that's ablative. So with what hope do you spend, right here, your otia, your dio otia, on Libyan lands? Your otia, of course, your leisure time. We learned this one from Catullus. He loves to talk about otium. Cicero is a fan of otium as well. But what you do with your leisure time kind of defines you as a Roman in the late Republic and the early Empire. And so we see Aeneas here spending his time helping Carthage out, and kind of lounging around in his purple garb, with his speckled sword and everything. So he's like, with what hope do you spend your leisure time on Libyan lands? The what hope is like, what do you plan to accomplish here? This isn't your fate, right? Si te nola mova tantarum gloria rerum, nec super ipse tua moliris laude laborem, ascaniam surgentem et spes heredis Iuli respice, cui regnum Italia Romana coetellus debetur. Get a really nice series of things there. The C clause, of course, we have to bracket here. There we are. Si te nulla movet. I immediately, every time I say, like, does something not move you, I always immediately think of in Catilinum, in the first paragraph, the first chunk of in Catilinum was like, does this not move you? So if no glory of such great things moves you, like if it does move you, right, then you got to do a thing, right? So I always immediately think of this, like, doesn't this affect you, from the in Catilinum when I see something about, like, does nothing move you? So if no glory moves of these great things moves you, nec super ipse tua moliris laude laborem. Let us label a little bit here. So ipse is your subject. Tua goes with laude. Moliris, I think, is a ris ending, and then you have your dio in laborem there. This ne clause seems to continue the C. So, and if you do not you yourself, sorry, ipse, if you yourself do not like flex your labor, like exert your labor beyond your own praise. So your super kind of goes super tua laude, and then you have like subject, verb, direct object built in there. It's a little bit odd, but there you go. Let's just erase. It's getting kind of messy over there. So if no glory of such great things moves you, and if you yourself do not exert your labor beyond your own praise, so, like, if those things are the case, he's like, at least do this, okay? Ascanium surgentem, accusative, nice participle agreeing with Ascanius there. At spes heredis Iuli, another accusative, space in the plural, heredis Iuli being genitive, going with space. So if you're not like moved with like with your own glory and your own praise, essentially, then consider Ascanius growing up surgentem, and the hope of the Julian line. Heredis is, of course, a line, a family line. So consider Ascanius, he's your son, who's going to found Alba Longa, who's going to, that's going to be where Romulus and Remus come from, etc., etc. So, like, consider Ascanius and the Julian line. So it's like, if like your own praise and virtue aren't like going to drive you, at least consider your family. Cui, to whom, this is of course referring to Ascanius, to whom regnum Italia, a kingdom of Italy, and that's in the nominative because it's neuter, and the Roman land debetur is owed, to whom the kingdom of Italy and the Roman land is owed. Tali Selenius ore locutus. So you get a nice little synthesis here, A, B, A, B. So Tali agrees with ore, Selenius agrees with, Kilenius agrees with locutus, makes a nice little A, B, A, B pattern. That's synthesis. That's kind of cool there. Kilenius is another name for Mercury. So Mercury, having spoke with such a, literally mouth, probably with such like a voice, with such a voice. Mortalis visus. This is mortalis with an is. That's another one that looks like it should be an is, but it's actually an es. So it's with accusative plural. Going with visus, which is fourth declension. So that's another accusative plural. So you have two accusative plurals. So Mercury, having spoken with such a voice, in the middle of his speech, he left behind mortal vision. In other words, he just kind of poofed from the sight of Aeneas. Et procul intenuam ex oculis invanuit auram. Intenuam auram is some agreement there. Ex oculis, and then invanuit's your verb. And he then vanished into thin air from his eyes. He vanished from his eyes into thin air. Here's the phrase "into thin air" in Latin. So apparently we were not in English the first ones to think of "into thin air." Intenuam auram, ex oculis, from his eyes he vanished. There, so this was all Mercury giving Aeneas a swift kick in the rear. He insults him. He makes sure to kind of shame him a little bit, and then if he's even like, hey, if you're not even a real hero who cares about his image, fine, care about the future of your family. And so he's appealing to, of course, Aeneas's sense of ethos here. So yeah, that's it's a really important passage because Dido is going to take the brunt of this. Okay, so Dido, of course, was shot by Cupid's arrow. If Aeneas leaves, she cannot hold herself together. That's just something she's incapable of with that kind of spell. So what you need to do is realize that this is kind of the turning point for Dido as well as Aeneas. Aeneas has to now leave. Obviously, the gods just told him he had to leave. And shamed him into staying, or not into, sorry, shamed him because he stayed. And so for Dido, this is kind of a cruel moment because it's not like a human failure, human error that causes all of her, all the things that happen to her, that cause the tragedy that is Dido to happen. It's actually helped out by even the divine and fate itself. And so that's kind of one of the things that makes it a tragedy, is that there's really no like bad guy. It's just bad things that happen to her, unfortunately, and kind of gets you to wonder if Dido is Cleopatra, which she seems very much so in the first passage of these two. Like, is her death really a good thing, as Horace would have you believe in one of his odes? Saying like let's dance and drink and celebrate because Cleopatra's dead. So it's tough in the Aeneid though, because you have to feel bad for Dido. She was not at fault really in any of this. She was shot by Cupid's arrow. That was not her fault. Aeneas stayed for a while and it was happy, and the leaving is what led to her downfall. And even looks like he didn't want to leave. He got kind of like kind of turned to the sea by the gods to say get going. So again, it seems like Dido is pure victim here. I feel bad for her. It seems like everybody's coming against her. But anyway, that's my take. I hope that this was helpful, and enjoy.